this is part 2 for favourites by genre. We were running out of time. The next genre that we're going to be talking about is memoirs slash biographies. I'm just going to simplify it and call it memoirs, but that covers memoirs, biographies, autobiographies, all of that kind of nature. If you don't know what this genre is, basically this is a genre where a person is writing a book that either heavily details or in part details moments that they went through throughout their life. Either they themselves are writing it or someone else is writing it about them. I read 6 memoirs slash the rest this year. My favourite is Talking as Fast as I Can by Lauren Graham. The reason why this is my favourite above all of the memoirs that I read this year is because of just how funny this book is. A lot of the memoirs that I read this year were very, very serious in nature, which I completely understand that they are. No one's life is, well, next to no one's life is a bed of roses, so I understand that there are going to be very heavy moments throughout memoirs, but Lauren Graham found a way to approach this book that I really appreciated, which was with humour. I have been a massive fan of Gilmore Girls for many, many, many years, and if you've seen that show too, this book reads as though Lorelai Gilmore herself wrote it. For those of you who have not seen Gilmore Girls, the character of Lorelai Gilmore is someone who can go off on very humorous tangents when just one sentence is being said to her, and she certainly does that in this book. There are dark moments that occur in this book, absolutely, but she finds a way to find the humour in things, and I really, really appreciate that. If you've not read this book and you love Lauren Graham, or if you've not read this book and you want to read a humorous memoir, I highly recommend this one. 2 other books I want to give special mentions to are Unstoppable by Maria Sharapova, and the final memoir I want to shout out is Julie Andrews' memoir, Home. I highly recommend each one, but if you want a humorous read, then I recommend this one. The next genre is 2 genres compiled into one, and that is mystery thriller. So, mystery thriller books. So, the mystery slash thriller genre are fictional books that are written that include mysteries that also mostly will have murders that occur in them. Now, I need to be very specific. I am not at all a fan of mysteries that involve policemen or those whose profession it is to solve mysteries. I am someone who loves to read mysteries where your everyday character is trying to solve a mystery. I read 6 thriller mysteries this year, some of which completely let me down, but my absolute favourite was The Guest List by Lucy Foley. I thought I gave this book 5 stars, but upon reflection I gave it 4. And I really, really enjoyed this book. This book was amazing. It is a multi-perspective book, which means that we are following at least, I think, 5 different characters, and the chapters alternate with different characters. So if that's something you haven't read before, that is something to be mindful of going in. But I can tell you this, every character is very, very different. They are all incredibly investable, and the climax, which is why we read mystery thrillers, because we want to get the big reveal at the end, is so worth the payoff. Oh my gosh. I never could have predicted, well, not never, but I did not predict the ending. Oh, it was so good, Lucy Foley. If you love your mystery thrillers and you don't want to be disappointed, this is the one you pick up. Also, a massive shout out to the 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. The next genre we're going to talk about is paranormal. For those of you who don't know what the paranormal genre is, especially for those of you who don't know the distinct difference between fantasy and paranormal slash urban fantasy, I'm including both of those in this genre we're discussing now, because I didn't know it at the beginning of the year, so I'm happy to tell you, and past Mr. Francy, if you happen to be listening, now you can learn this too. The difference is paranormals are books that revolve around mythical beings such as, like, for example, vampires, ghosts, I think, as well. And fantasy versus urban fantasy. Urban fantasy to fantasy set in a city. Most of the time, low fantasy has the lowest amount of fantastical elements in my experience. Urban fantasy is the medium range for fantastical elements. High fantasy is all fantastical elements. So if you're wanting a book that has a ton of fantasy, go for a high fantasy. You can't lose. If you want a book that has a little bit of fantasy and a lot of contemporary, go for a low fantasy. And if you want both, go for urban. My favorite paranormal / urban fantasy book for the year was the final book in the Vampire Academy series, Last Sacrifice. This series as a whole for me was completely up and down. There are 6 books, 3 of them I gave 3 stars to, although one of them could have been 2. And the other 3 I gave 5 stars to. I gave book 5 stars because there was 2 things that I predicted that was going to happen. One of those in book 5 and one in book 6. They both happened in book 5, so I had no idea what was going to happen in book 6 because we tied up everything that was a loose end in book 5. But book 6 was the best book in the entire series and is my favorite paranormal book of 2020. Shoutouts to Bloodlines and Vampire Kisses by Ellen Schreiber. The next genre we're going to be discussing is romance. Aww. So, if you don't know what romance is, basically a romance is a book that literally revolves around that. At least 2 people getting together, whether they know each other or don't know each other. Typically, from what I've heard, it will start off with them knowing each other or not knowing each other, but not being in a relationship. And then eventually, by the end of the book, they are going to be together in a relationship, hopefully halfway through. So we get to explore their time while they're in a relationship, hence why it is called a romance. It is all based around love. So, I read 1 romance this year. Oh no, just 1. So I can only talk about 1. Romance is just not something that appeals to me, especially the smut. Smut just does not appeal to me at all. I've maybe in my life read 3 smut books, and honestly, this is just my thought. Other people will say differently, and there are other booktubers out there who read smut books, so if you want to see smut books being talked about, you can go and check them out because they are out there. But for me personally, I think smut books are fine. The problem is, once we get into those sexy scenes, it really takes me out of the narrative. I am definitely a plot-driven, narration-driven reader, and so when we have a long sex scene and then we have a tiny scene of the plot moving forward, then we have another long graphic sex scene, it just pulls me out of the story, and so they're just not the type of book for me. But romance, I didn't think it was for me either, and then I received a recommendation: if you don't like romance, try this and see if you like it, and I do. It is P.S. I Like You by Casey West. I will categorize it as a romance because that's what it is, but I'm going to personally think of it as a romance contemporary because there is a lot more going on than just a relationship. So basically we have a girl who is in class at high school in science class. She writes some lyrics on a desk. She comes back in her next class to see that those lyrics have been added to. She then adds to those lyrics, and then there is an anonymous letter back and forth communication, kind of like with Letters to the Lost, however set in the science classroom, where they'll stick the letter under the table and, you know, take it out and add to it and all that kind of stuff. The first half of this book was very juvenile for me. I love middle grades, and yet I just felt I felt too old for the first half of the book. But the second half was incredible. I will warn you, if you're going into this book for the anonymous letter side of things, the 2 characters that are writing to each other find out who they are by the halfway mark. The reason for this is because that's not the point of the book. The point of the book is to see what happens from there, which is what makes it a romance. It's not just about the letters, but about these 2 working out who each other is and progressing with their platonic relationship from there and seeing if it develops into anything more. So I would say go into it knowing that it starts off reading like a very young middle grade book in my mind, like very immature middle grade book to begin with, but the second half, oh my gosh, was so good, and I really want to read another Casey West very soon. But yeah, I'm not typically a romance reader. I only read one book. I'm happy I did, and yeah, I have other Casey West books now on my wish list, so I'm glad that I was introduced to this author and to this book. The final genre we are going to be talking about is sci-fi, or which is the shortened term for science fiction. For those of you who don't know what science fiction is, let me tell you in brief shortness. Space, robots, AI. That's your typical sci-fi. Yeah, space, robots, AI, information technology, that kind of stuff, okay? Now, I came into 2020 being the first to say sci-fi is not for me. And then some people would say, oh, but you know, don't you love sci-fi fantasy? And nay, sir, they are two completely different things. Unless you have a book or a film or show that is specifically both categories in one, both categories are two separate things. Fantasy, magic, fantastical elements, sci-fi, robots, space, artificial intelligence. They are two different things. However, I began reading my one of my first sci-fis this year, not knowing it was a sci-fi to begin with. I was convinced I was going to be reading a fantasy, and then I started reading the book and I thought, no, hang on. This is not reading like a fantasy. And then I came to find out that it was a sci-fi. I'm so happy that it worked out that way, because had I known it was a sci-fi, I might not have read it. And I ended up loving this book. And that is Steelheart by Brandon Sanderson. This is not a Cosmere book. It is a YA book that Sanderson has written, for those of you who know about the Cosmere world. Oh my gosh, this is a sci-fi superhero book that I just absolutely love. The basic premise of this book is that we're following a boy whose name is David. He and his father are in a bank trying to get a loan when the bank is held up by an epic, the bad guys, the evil robots, and then it's held up by an even bigger epic by the name of Steelheart, who is said to be invincible, but David's father ends up shooting this Steelheart epic and he starts spouting blood. So everyone knows that he is not as immortal as he thinks he is. Then Steelheart ends up killing everyone in the bank. This is in chapter 1. He kills everyone in the bank. Somehow David makes it out alive and makes it his life's mission to learn everything he can about epics so he can get his revenge. One day, by happenstance, he comes across a group of people known as the Reckoners, whose sole mission it is to take out all the epics in this world. He joins them with all the information he has. He's a walking, talking epicopedia. He joins them, and yeah, it's amazing. I love it. I never thought I'd love sci-fi, and yet I do. The Calculating Stars by Mary Robinette Kowal. This was part of the Murphy Napier Buddy Reading Book of the Month. This is amazing because the main character that we are following is a female who is being treated differently in NASA because she is a woman, and she ends up fighting for female equality, and it is just incredible to watch how she does this, from the grassroots moments to building it up to where she gets it to. It is amazing. There is so much more to this book, but that's what I loved about this. I love female empowerment. I love when women are fighting for equality. This was just absolutely incredible. And my fantasy list wouldn't be complete without Bot Wars, the very first fantasy that I read ever, and this year, but ever. And I absolutely love this. This is a middle grade fantasy about a boy who lives in a world run by robots. His father goes missing. His mother is dead at the beginning of the book. He needs to go find his father, and a journey ensues with these robots that are just absolutely amazing. I highly recommend it. Also, Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. If you haven't read it, that series, really good as well. Book 3 coming out next year. But that is where we are going to leave it, because this has gone on for way more than we needed it to. So What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comment section below. In the meantime, letting you guys go peace, blessings, and so much love. I post videos every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday for now, and I'll see you again soon. Mwah. Thank you so much for watching, and Merry Christmas!